Welcome to One Leg Up, where we discuss how you can deliver the very best customer experience and how you can achieve zero marketing waste. I'm Ed Davis, the Chief Operations Ninja here at One Leg, and today I'm joined, as ever, by our CEO and mastermind, Vic Sun. Vic, how are things?
Good. We're super busy, and I'm glad we're doing this today. Been a while. Been a while since we did one.
It has been a while, but there were the holidays, there was this, there was that. But we're back, we're better than ever. We've got a whole slate of really good episodes coming up that we're going to be working on getting recorded and distributed. So we're really excited about that. We thought we'd start off the year with a really interesting topic, one that comes up on a fairly regular basis and one that just about everybody in every sales position deals with, or sales and marketing position deals with, no matter the industry that you're in. There's some version of this. And that is really, and it's sort of a phrase that Vic has coined a little bit. You hear about it in other realms, tire kickers. We think of it in terms of, are you a serious buyer? Or are you a curious buyer? And so where I'd like to start, Vic, is where does that come from? And what exactly do we mean when we talk about serious versus curious?
I think it really starts from the user's journey and their intent, and a lot of the times, marketing agencies and departments, they don't really even know, right, the difference between the two. And so they're, a lot of the times whether you're generating leads or you're trying to generate revenue, you're looking at your prospects the same way. And the reality is, they're not. The overwhelming majority of prospects are curious. They're not serious, right? If they're serious, then they'd be contacting you. They'd be driving,
you wouldn't have to be marketing to them, is essentially what we're saying.
And my contention is you wouldn't have to sell them. Right. You really don't have to do the whole sales pitch and the song and dance and these promotions, because serious buyers have certain values that they already have in mind, and there's certain things that you can do to align to those things, but for the most part, when you're serious about doing something, making a purchase or facilitating a transaction, I think your motivation is very different from one where you're just browsing around, if you're just curious.
Sure. No, 100%. And I think the other thing too is, I was thinking about this as we were prepping for this. I think the internet has actually made it worse, right? And digital marketing has actually made curious worse in some very specific ways. It's better in some, and from a customer standpoint, right? Because you don't have to necessarily drive around to a bunch of brick and mortar stores or anything like that just to, poke and prod and see and all that kind of stuff. And I think it also, allows companies to be a bit more efficient in their physical assets that they might have to have. But on the flip side of that, marketers and companies in general, spend a significant amount of time and resources on curious buyers, because we do have to be conscious of those people, right? Because, the mindset has to be, well, at some point they might turn into serious buyers, and or can we do anything to instigate them going from curious to serious along a predefined path that we have, that we think would be beneficial both to the customer and to ourselves. But like I said, I think if you look at it by and large, there's a lot of time and effort spent on identifying curious people to try and get them into sort of serious mode. You know what I mean?
I think most companies, that do not have, compelling content, that do not have the ability to harness the data or even study it and analyze it, right, in order to be able to really drill down to their target audiences, right, or those particular funnels. They are really more concerned about curious, right? That's all they know. That's all they want. Quantity is important, and so they live in that, right? It feels good. because when you get a lot of inquiries, you get a lot of leads, you get a lot of clicks. It feels good. It feels like you're actually doing
You're
something.
making some progress. Yeah.
Even with salespeople, like whether you're an ABM, right, and you're hitting up several different leads or opportunities in your pipeline, or you're doing in-home presentations, and the standard is you've got to have at least 10 to 12 of these each week. A lot of waste, right? Because really, what you're doing is you're doing it by the numbers, and you're saying, well, I'm going to go and have 10 to 12 of these curious people, and I already know that only about 10 to I think maximum 30% of them, right? 1 to 3. The rest of them really will not amount to anything, right? It's
Right.
just you're going through the motions. And I think one of the compelling points you made there, and I have a question to ask you, is really how does the marketing strategy and the tactics and the lack of content perpetuate the lead generation and just curious? You know what I mean? Because lead generation companies out there like Home Advisor, Angie, Modernize, several of these companies that just sell leads, there is really no relevant content, right? They're
Right.
basically looking at keywords, they're looking at inquiries, generating lead forms, and then they sell this to several people. That's what a lead aggregator does, right? And so how does the lack of content and the lack of targeting and the lack of personalization perpetuate that, in your opinion?
Well, I think it really gets into what your stance is and what your approach is just in general, right? And a lot of that gets into brand personality, the culture of your organization, right? And so if you're an organization that all we want to do is generate leads so that we can push those leads into our sales team and they can close at the 15% or 10% or whatever the case may be, so that we can then generate the predictable revenue that we can based on this formula, which we've talked about on previous podcasts and we've talked about in webinars and all that kind of stuff. Then yeah, you don't actually need a lot of content. You don't need to actually think through, what that actual customer journey is, other than I need to have a wide net to attract somebody, and then I'm going to force onto them what it is that I want to sell, right? And I think we are very fortunate to have a number of clients who take the opposite, right? And they are interested in what is the content, what are the decision triggers that are along the way, and can we actually build a relationship with somebody who might not necessarily be in the market right now, but we want to occupy a space in their mind in the future, right? And I think those are really interesting companies, especially from a home improvement standpoint, because that is a radical way of thinking about business development and sales in a home improvement context. And so from my standpoint, if you look at it from what I've historically done on a B2B side or a B2B marketing standpoint, or really even from a B2C, this is really where this started. You have to create brand affinity, right, with your target audience. And creating brand affinity doesn't mean that right in this very specific moment, I need to put a Coke in your hand, or I need to put the keys of this new Volvo in your hand. That's really not what this is about. It's really about creating visibility and creating sort of these moments of interaction where you might just get a little piece of what the value proposition is for that new Volvo, right? You might not be in the mood to buy a new car or in the market for a new car, but you will be in a year or 2 or 3, and they're making the significant investment to, like I said, occupy that little bit of space in your mind. And we've talked about it before. A friend of mine in the UK is big on talking about, if you're one of the first 3 brands that get immediately come to mind, 90% of the time you're going to win. And so, we've adopted that a little bit here at One Leg, and we put our own spin on it. But so, yeah, from my standpoint, those are the types of companies that I think over the long haul actually went out, because the world is dramatically changing in terms of how customers want to interact with companies and how they want their data and their information to be handled, and what happens when I actually give you my information. I think that brings us nicely around to some of the ways in which we talk about how do we handle, you know, identifying the curious people versus the serious people? And, are there some telltale signs, whether it's sort of digital body language or actual physical body language, that we can think about?
Yeah, I think you've got to look at multiple elements, which is really the thing that a lot of companies are not equipped to do. And someone, an agency, another agency owner once told me, the reason that brand and brand affinity and data and analytics, is because in home improvement, for example, for big purchases, people are only doing it every 10 years. Like,
Right.
why the hell do you need to do brand and all of that stuff? And I thought to myself, what a stupid thing to say, because it's like, the reality is people are never ready to do these things the minute that you start going to market, whether you're sending them promotions every week or every month or mailers or those sort of things that are pretty common within certain industries, right? And so the overwhelming majority, the blue ocean of your opportunity, are people who are in fact curious. They're not serious, right? And so if your strategy is always to hit on the curious people with promotions and those sort of things, thinking that they're serious, right away you've got a targeting issue, you've got a strategy issue, and the results that you're getting are what you're getting now, right? I think what's interesting is, you've really got to look at it from multiple elements. You've got to look at within your own database. You've got to study that. You've got to take a look at the people who've purchased, who've not purchased, their age range, their demographics, credit scores. All of this stuff is literally free, right? If you try to mark it down to well, how do I pick these points are? But it's just effort, right? And sometimes it is bandwidth. Most of the time, it is bandwidth. You don't have enough. You don't
Sure.
have people in your team who know how to do this.
Or
They
training.
know,
Yeah.
yeah,
Bandwidth and
or
training.
a bandwidth and training. The other thing is, if you're going to go to market, then yeah, it's really studying the marketplace, your competitors, picking up these data points, and really, once you have all of those, it's now doing a lot of testing, right? And seeing, okay, well, this is the content, and then building on that. When people talk about, well, the intent side of things, right? You've got the low buying intent, curious leads, or prospects. Typically it's because you created that, right? That's by design, right? You've come up with, let's say, a landing page has a promotion and then a lead form of some sort, and really, if that's what it is and you've done nothing else other than that, then what you are producing is a low buying intent lead, a curious
Right.
person, right? A curious buyer or a persona. Whereas, a serious one, I think this is where the struggle happens with many companies is, you're not going to get that person signing up right away. What you have maybe, at the most positive end of things, is maybe somebody who's going to follow you, somebody who's going to subscribe to your newsletter, right? Follow your page or your YouTube channel, or follow you on social media. And the reason that they're doing that is because they're not ready. So you're not going to get that lead right away. However, as you build the content and as they consume it, they start getting primed, they start feeling like you're the company. Then once they start providing you with their information or connecting with you, that becomes a higher buying intent lead. So not only is the curious and serious, concept a major, I think, an issue, right, within many industries, but it's also this concept that you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you are
Mm.
really going to focus on serious, right, which in studies have shown, companies have proven it day in and day out that have done it, that is where the growth happens. This is where the revenue takes place. That's where it's most profitable. You're going to get less quantity of leads, right, or prospects, because let's face it, in the beginning, you're making a stand at, look, I want to be able to cater to the people who will be serious buyers, right, and get
Right.
rid of the waste. Now, I said in the beginning, because what you see is a rise in that quantity over a period of time, right? Because your content, and this is actually, the simplest way to explain this is to really just relate it to, if you think about influencers. In the beginning, when influencers, they start off with very little followers, they build a lot of content, but as they start growing their amount of content and the type of audiences, the serious people who
Mm-hmm.
want to follow them, the rise is exponential. And this is
Right.
why you start seeing them going from very, very slow up to 10,000, and then they hit, 20, and then it's slow to 30. But once they start getting to the 50, it becomes 100, and then very 500. It's so exponential, right? Because they've invested in the content that, that's driven the serious people to their
Well, I
sites.
look at it. I look at it as your serious buyers are the ones who are going to impact your revenue today, right? And your curious ones are the ones who are going to impact it next year, 5 years from now. So you have to have a little bit of a not balanced approach, but you have to have an approach to account for both of those types of people because people.
I agree.
Well, more specifically along a spectrum, right? Because if you the best example that I can give is, one time my wife and I were shopping for cars and we were not interested in, I won't say the manufacturer, um, but we ended up buying a Volvo and it's another Swedish car maker. And are they Swedish? Yeah, they're Swedish. And we just happened, that their dealership was right next door to the Volvo dealership. And we just happened to wander over there just to see. And when we got over there, I'm not kidding you. Within 2 minutes of walking on the lot, and you got to walk through the cars before you get to the showroom. Like some guy was already walking over to us, and how you folks doing today? You in the mood for buying a car? Blah 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 blah. And our answer was, well, we're just sort of out taking a look. It's a nice day out. And he essentially looked at us for about 2 seconds, and then went, okay, no problem, and turned around. Right? It wasn't any further conversation. He didn't try to further qualify, is there anything that I can do or anything like that? It was just he made a snap assessment. Oh, well, I'm not going to be able to sell them today. They're just out, because it's a nice day out. Well, that wasn't necessarily true because within a couple hours we were back over at Volvo buying a brand new car. You know what I mean? And so, I think salespeople in particular, and again, I'm not trying to bag on salespeople for sure. I think at times they get a little bit ahead of themselves and they're more interested in, am I going to be able to sell this person today? Does that have an impact on I might not be here in a year from now. So what the hell do I care about whether or not we're trying to build a relationship with them?
Because they're trained that way, right?
Agree. Yeah. No, understood.
You're so used to low intent, low quality, low closing prospects that your training is geared towards, they're going to be serious as long as you present this particular
right
presentation or pitch, when that's not really the overwhelming majority of the audience. And so there's really this disconnect between marketing and sales, where you've got a marketing qualified lead, an MQL, versus a sales qualified lead, an SQL. And in most cases, I would say 9 out of 10 times in a lot of companies, those two things are not, they're not synonymous with one another, right?
Exactly.
They're very different. Yep. And so what you get is, again, this disconnect. But what I know is from my experience with salespeople, either training them, working with them, is that they always have, this affinity for those sales that they make when the client says to them, yeah, I've been seeing you, on these ads, or, you've seen those really cool things that you guys do and the videos that you produced. And that becomes really the topic of the conversations. I'm aligning, the consumers aligning themselves with the values of the company, as opposed to just trying to negotiate between the company and all its other competitors that look the same.
Right.
Which really that becomes that's where most companies live. That's where the low close rates are. Whereas if the conversation is, yeah, I really like the content that you guys produce, it sounds like this is what you guys are doing, and it's no longer, this selling thing is happening. It's more like you're order taking almost, right? Which, I've always argued that with our approach versus, I think, a lot of companies, regardless of what sales agencies or organizations or training companies say, oh, you need to sell. For me, it's like there is no one salesperson in this world that will complain about taking an order. and say, "Oh man, my dignity and my skills weren't recognized because I took an order." Like salespeople, will take an order, just as fast as they would sell
Sure.
what a client. So I think that's just the difference there. Um, why do you think people are so? I mean, you talked about the spectrum of having strategies where you hit the serious and the curious. And obviously, you want to have that balance, right? But what is the thing that stops a lot of companies from taking that strategy and just we're going to keep doing what we're doing?
I think a lot of it is impatience, right? I think we have been trained uh, as consumers, you know, we want instant gratification, and in virtually every part of our lives, by and large, right? And that manifests itself in most businesses as, what are we doing to generate a sale today, right now? Blah 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 blah. There really is no visibility. There really is not a ton of concern about what are we doing to build a revenue base or an engaged audience a year from now or 2 years from now. And I think some of the points that underlie that is, look at the average tenure of marketing people or heads of sales or CEOs. It used to be, I think, 20 years ago, the average tenure of a CMO was something in the neighborhood of 4 or 5, 6 years, somewhere around there. Now it's banging on 2 years. I think it may even dipped lower than 24 months at this point.
In
And
some industries, though, I would argue, like in home improvement remodeling, I think it's the reverse, but that's their crutch, because usually
correct.
you've got people
I
who are
was just
sitting
gonna
there who are basically still marketing like 2011,
correct. Right,
So
and I was just going to come on to that. There are some
mhm.
industries where they are they are antithetical to what else is happening in the world, and in home improvement in particular, as you and I have seen. There's this trend to, and again, I'm the last person to bang on, an experienced older crowd or, an inexperienced younger crowd, but that's really where you're at in home improvement, in terms of, if you actually have a home improvement company that has any sort of scale, that isn't just a couple people, trying to start a business or something along those lines, more than likely they have an older person who oversees marketing. They're doing a lot of the same things that they were doing 5, 6, 10 years ago, or they've brought in somebody who is 2 years out of college who happens to understand social media or something along those lines. And by understand social media, I'd absolutely use air quotes. And we put those people in charge of marketing, and because we feel like they're a little bit easier to manage, and they're not going to necessarily question, you know, the longer term play married with the short term play, married with brand development, married with sales development. Like, they just have no concept of that, and it really is just a matter of ticking a box and doing what it is that's been done forever and a day.
Yeah, and I think that's also one of the crutches is, there's a lot of these issues, and it's like almost so difficult to find a way to make a change, because it's either everybody else is doing the same thing and you're so afraid that if you do something different, you're going to fail. And then the
Sure.
ones that do, and we've had this experience with one or two clients where that impatience, it's like, holy shit, like you just made the switch to this program after like 20 years of doing the same thing, and then they're disappointed that in 6 months they didn't double their business. Like
They're disappointed in 6 days they didn't double their business.
right,
We
yeah,
you know what I
well,
mean?
but then you go, aren't you hiring for the long term? But I think it's that balance, and I think you know owners need to develop this commitment to, well, look, I know that this is the right thing to do, and I would like to see improvements rather than just results, right? Because when you're so geared towards that, I think this is the problem with a lot of companies, whether in home improvement, real estate, e-commerce. We've got clients like that too in that space, where they want that 3 month turnaround from their investment. And then you look at everything else that they're doing, like that's been successful. It's been like, it was only successful after the second or the third year.
Yeah.
And to them, it's like, oh my God, like it's been 3 months. How come it hasn't worked? So,
Well, but I think there's another dynamic too that we haven't talked about. But it does come up in certain industries, and certainly it comes up in home improvement, um, which is and you'll know this, Vic, because you've heard me say it before to clients. What are we trying to build here from a business standpoint? Are we trying to build a legacy business that stands the test of time and can get handed down from one generation to the next, quite literally one generation to the next? Or are we building a lifestyle business to keep the ownership, in a nice car, a nice house, and with a country club membership? If that's where you're at, more than likely you are absolutely focused on lead gen and what is it that I can do to generate maximum number of sales today, this week, this month, this quarter. If you fall into, I'm building a legacy and I have a much longer term view, and I ultimately I want this to be something that outlives me, Ed Davis. Like, you think about it from a one leg standpoint, you and I are both agreed, it in the immediate, this is really about a lifestyle to give a group of people who, are trying to build a business, the foundation of a nice life and a nice working environment. But we're also agreed that we want one leg to survive, you and I, one way or the other, right? And so you take a different view and you make different decisions, and you put the decision making process through a different prism. And I think what comes along with that is the sales and marketing side. And so, it's a multifaceted sort of challenge, if you will. But I think at the end of the day, you really have to ask yourself some hard questions if you're a business owner in terms of what is it you're trying to build and why.
well, the thing that you mentioned in the beginning is, how do you identify, for example, these people? So how do you know that you can actually harness the serious and the curious, and what that virtual or visual cues, right, for people to know that, so that they can start to describe their business? I think it starts with their audience, and the reality is,
Sure.
a lot of companies, again, aren't really looking at some of the most basic things. Like, for example, we look at, for example, websites that have been built for them that are right off the gate, it's a templated site
Right.
that's built on Elementor or some sort of, like, template heavy design. And then you go and say, well, there's nothing wrong with that, fine. But then you go and say, well, the minute that person steps in there, what do they see? What do you tell them? And the first thing you see are a 2 or 3 call to actions that are pretty much the same thing. There's lead form, right? Give
Right.
me your info. And then when you ask the business owners, like you would, what's the plan here? And they were like, well, I just want more. Well, more of what? More of people who fill out something or don't fill out something? Because the majority of the people who visit your site, for example, leave, right? So you just want more of that? Or do you want more of the people who fill out that don't convert, right? And to them, it's like, well, I just want more quantity of names and numbers, right? So I can contact them. So I think it's not just like, if we were to go and say, look, and we do for our clients, we say, these are your target audience, this is their behavior, this is what they're doing on your site, this is the heat map of their journey, when their behavior, we plug that into their sites, landing pages and such.
Well,
Right.
but yeah, right. But even taking that a step further, and we're starting to do this with some of our clients. Let's be a little bit more pragmatic than that, and let's segment our audience right from the get go. Right. So when our audience comes to our website, let's just ask them a very simple question. And this isn't the exact question you would ask, but just for the sake of this conversation, I'm trying to make it as as easy to follow along as possible. Are you ready to buy? Or are you not ready to buy? If you're ready to buy, you've got one experience on our website that ultimately is going to lead you into a position where you get an estimate, you get to communicate with the company on your terms, all that kind of stuff. If you're not ready to buy, then we're going to push you into a content funnel that helps you understand when you might, what are the triggers I need
Correct.
to recognize within myself that says, oh yeah, I am ready for this service, or I am ready for this product, right? And so it's more of an educational sort of dialogue. And let's just get it right out there at the front. Let's divide the audience so that we can then focus our efforts on both, right? We can absolutely nurture those leads who want something now, and we can also nurture those contacts who, they might be ready in a year, they might be ready in 6 months.
Sorry, it's so funny you mentioned that, because we did that for one of our clients, and their numbers rose by 300%.
Correct.
Because we said in numbers, sales as opposed to leads, right?
Right.
The leads have maintained the same, but the conversion has like grown in strides. And I think, and it's funny because he was mentioning he was a Hatch user, and we've done stuff with Hatch and podcasts and stuff like that, and we've started to see a lot of Hatch users. But he was like, well, I don't get it, because when people were getting here, I was giving them content, and I said, what is content? And we looked at it. Everybody was getting the same 17 messages.
Right.
That was templated right from within out of the box, and then it kind of goes into funnel. Hatch is able to do that out of the box, just like templates that they've built for you. And I said, well, if everybody's getting the same content and everybody's getting the same verbiage, how are you really personalizing and targeting those people who are serious, right? Or who are curious? Because there's no discrepancy, there's no differentiation. And I think that's the challenge, right? Is there has to be work involved in person, because once you know the information of, well, here's my two target audiences, the curious and the serious, and this is what they look like, the messaging and the content will be different for both of those,
Yep.
right? You have to test them. You have to absolutely do A/B tests, and that takes time, but it also provides you with even better targeting once you complete those testing.
Correct.
Which usually only takes 30 to 60 days, right? At the minimum. And I think that one thing I would kind of motivate a lot of owners out there who are kind of scared to death about doing these tests and kind of saying, you want me to go and have their users right from the get-go reveal who they are, is this. Whatever you're doing now, just ask yourself this question: if I don't make a change, will it improve over time? And if the answer is yes, fine, then keep doing what you're doing. But if whatever you're doing now in not doing anything is not going to improve over a period of time, then you've got really nothing to lose.
Yep.
Right? Testing this and putting it together, it's like it's all the gains. And I would say this, an owner told me once, he said, and he was smart enough to recognize this. He said, I realized after the pandemic, I had to restart my business like it was 26 years ago. I had to really think about it and say, well, when I first started my business, I had to invest, I had to risk, because I didn't know. And after the pandemic, the pendulum has shifted, and he saw that, right? There was no events were banned, so he was event heavy, he was canvasser heavy, and so he said, well, I needed to do something that was different. And the first 6 months obviously was terrible, but then he focused on improvement. He just kept at it. But I think that was the mindset. It was like, I need to invest into my company, and if I haven't been doing it for a very, very long time, I expect that I'm not going to do it so well right from the get-go, but it will improve over time.
Yep. Well, we're gonna park it right there, and that's it for us today. We hope you've enjoyed our chat and learned a couple things. As always, we here at OneLeg believe poor marketing pollutes the planet, and that business is full of tired, outdated, indistinct, unremarkable, and underperforming marketing that sucks. But what sucks even more is that many companies have forgotten the most important thing of all: the customer. We're on a mission on behalf of our clients' customers to change that. To learn more, go to zeromarketingwaste.com, where you can subscribe to our blog and this very podcast. You can also find us and follow us by looking for the flamingo and the OneLeg handle wherever you socialize online. That's it for us. Talk to you next time.